How big is the One Piece world? The short answer is very, but the longer and more satisfying answer is the rest of this video. I always assumed that the One Piece world was bigger than Earth, maybe 2 or 3 times at most, but mate, I was wrong, and it took the words of a Birdman to trigger today's journey when he stated that within the One Piece world, there are potentially 10 to 20 million islands. And that got me thinking. My thought was, it's quite a few, which was very shocking because looking at this world thing, and it doesn't seem that big. I mean, it's not even as big as I am, and I am far from some sort of Galactus. But if this planet has around 10 to 20 times as many islands as our real world planet thing, does that mean that the One Piece world is 10 to 20 times bigger than Earth? Because that might actually explain a few things, like how sea kings exist, colossal creatures that are on average 5 kilometers long, or how a 35-kilometer tall elephant can be classified as a phantom island somehow remaining hidden, or the rather startling reality that this umbrella at the entrance of Onigashima is taller than the Burj Khalifa. So here's the scary thing. The idea of the One Piece planet being 10 to 20 times the size of Earth is an understatement. I can prove it with fictional facts. Because series author Eiichiro Oda does not shy away from giving oddly specific measurements of his world, and for a taste of some hot throbbing scale, we are going to stop by the desert nation of Alabasta, an island with a population of 10 million people, which is around the population of the United Arab Emirates, as well as many other countries, but I chose the UAE for fun thematic desert-related reasons. Whilst the Straw Hats were on the island to punch a crocodile, in order to get to the capital city Alabana, Vivi and the Straw Hats had to cross the Sandora River, which Vivi stated was 30 miles wide. Not 30 miles long, 30 miles wide. Or around 50 kilometers for those of us who use sensible measurements. And at the climax of the arc, we get this exceptionally beautiful bird's eye shot of Alabasta. It's a shot from the perspective of the raindrops about to gracefully fall onto the capital city, and when you see the whole country, it really puts into perspective how those tiny quirky mini-maps we saw showed us almost nothing of Alabasta and that we'd barely explored the nation despite how much time we'd spent there. But the most shocking thing is seeing the Sandora River in relation to the rest of the country, because it looks like a crack in a wall. However, using the width of said crack, we can now measure the actual size of Alabasta, which was done by Sin Cameron 20, who created a red line and then a blue line, and then ascertained that Alabasta is 3,180 kilometers long, and that this blue line clocks in at 3,980 kilometers wide. That is almost 4,000. And that's very relevant to me because, as it turns out, Alabasta is shockingly close to being almost the exact same size as Australia, because the distance of Australia from east to west coast is 4,030 kilometers. And to put that into terms that 44.9% of my audience will understand, that's only about 500 kilometers less than the distance from east to west coast of the United States. And if you were to put 2 Alabastas side by side, you'd only be 1,000 kilometers shy of the east to west distance of Russia, aka by far the biggest of the countries on the earth. And in One Piece, it only takes 2 and a bit of these 10 to 20 million islands to equal that. Now let's be fair, Alabasta is one of the larger Grand Line islands, many of which are minuscule in comparison. And in fact, later on in this video, we are going to calculate the size of the average Grand Line island, which is going to be mind-blowing. But at this stage, we do need to ask the question of, is Alabasta's scale an aberration and perhaps a case of Eiichiro Oda putting numbers on pages with no real concept of what they actually imply? That is entirely possible. One Piece is not a series well known for its consistent scaling, such as my personal favorite image of all time of Zoro and Kozuki Oden side by side, because these two somehow used the same sword, a sword which should be taller than Zoro according to Oda's sizing. But it isn't because something fictional pirate story. So maybe Alabasta is the same situation. To know for sure, we'd need to check the other islands to see if there's any sort of consistency. And so our go-to is Alabasta 2.0, Dressrosa, located in the New World. And the most important resident of Dressrosa that I'd like to introduce you to is Viola, because she has one of the most overpowered devil fruits in the series called the Giro Giro no Mi, aka the Glare Glare fruit, which gives her access to X-ray vision, mind reading, and molten whale tears. But very importantly, for the sake of this video, there is a 4th ability. Viola has a technique called Senrigan, meaning clairvoyance and translated as the all-seeing eye. This allows Viola to see everything that's happening within a 4,000 kilometer radius, and she claims that she can see literally everything happening anywhere on the island. And the position where she was located at the time of the statement was the north coast of the island near Green Bit, meaning that for Viola to see the entire nation, Dressrosa must be at least 4,000 kilometers both long and wide, because it's an almost perfectly circular nation. So basically, Dressrosa is another Australia. So much for it being Spain. Hola, mate. points. But do you know what country you don't expect to be Australia? Well, that would be Japan. Japan kind of has its own thing going on, except in One Piece, where the distance of the nation of Wano is given. Although, scandalously, it never got translated into English. Whilst Oden is boiling in the pot of oil during the legendary hour, arrow letters are fired all across the country, informing people of why Oden had been acting like a fool for the past 5 years. Now, in the English translation, this says, "The letter arrows of Wano cross great distances to send messages," which is not what the original Japanese says. In Japanese, it's stated that the arrow letters crossed a distance greater than senri. Sen meaning 1,000, so the arrows crossed 1,000 ri. But what is this ri, you ask? A ri is a traditional Chinese unit of distance that was also adopted by Japan, with a single ri in Japan being approximately 3.93 kilometers. And just as a side note, Viola's all-seeing eye, the senri gun, contains the same wording. Senri gun, senri, 1,000 ris. And guess what happens when you put 1,000 ris together? That adds up to 3,930 kilometers, meaning that Wano is the size of another Australia. That's 3 Australias now. In fact, it's very potentially even larger because it depends entirely on where the arrow letters were sent from. Because if they were sent from the flower capital in the sort of center, then Wano could be twice as big as Australia and starting to encroach on Russia scales of landmass. But I take it you've started to notice the One Piece trend now, being that all major arc islands tend to be around 4,000 kilometers wide and anywhere between 3,000 to 4,000 kilometers long at the very least. And the reason for this is quite simple. It's because whenever Oda designs a space, it would seem that he starts with a blank template of 1,000 ri, because it's a nice round number with a lot of cultural meaning, as well as using a measurement of the past to tell this great fantasy epic. The bigger point being that Oda wasn't just high and not thinking when he stated the Alabasta distances, he was actually being very precise, and that size was as intentional 20 years ago as it is now. In fact, he's remained consistent to a fault with this 4,000 kilometer system. To look at things on a smaller yet still ridiculously massive scale, the Ninja Pirate Mink Samurai Alliance sailing into Onigashima is one of the most trippy panels in the entire series because there's a lot of mundane looking objects like swords and umbrellas. However, and you may genuinely miss this, but if you look all the way the crap down here, you'll see a tiny blob that is the Thousand Sunny, which according to the Viviacard data book is 56 meters tall, meaning that this umbrella is taller than the Burj Khalifa, which currently holds the real life record of being the world's tallest building. In the One Piece world, the Burj Khalifa is just set dressing for an infinitely more colossal building. And they also want to put this into perspective with concepts such as the ancient weapons. Pluton, Uranus, and Poseidon are all said to be capable of destroying islands. In the case of Uranus, we've even seen it happen. But according to Oda's consistent scaling, these weapons have destructive power that most of us haven't even come close to comprehending, because one shot from these could theoretically destroy the United States of America. I chose America instead of Australia this time because I live in Australia and thus don't want to be destroyed. But now that we know that Alabasta wasn't an aberration and that Oda actually has a surprisingly strict sizing system, we can use this to calculate the size of the Grand Line and the One Piece planet itself. And I want to preface this by saying that even though things are very consistent, I don't think that Oda planned for the planet to be quite as big as it apparently is. Size and scale in One Piece has a lot more to do with the quest to continue to keep Luffy looking small, to keep him in the status of underdog, despite the fact that he is continually snowballing in terms of both power and influence. So as Luffy discovers more and more, as he gains more and more power, the world around him gets bigger and bigger, to keep Luffy looking like that same boy in a barrel who we first met during Romance Dawn. For a micro example, there's a trend of each villain Luffy going up against getting bigger. Doflamingo, for example, is twice Luffy's height, and doing this makes Doflamingo look like a looming, insurmountable challenge to Luffy. But then, after defeating Doflamingo, Luffy needed a greater challenge, which brought us to Charlotte Katakuri, who is approximately 3 Luffys tall, and after Luffy beat Katakuri, guess what the next step is? We need a bigger challenge, which was delivered through Kaido, who is 4 Luffys tall. In his base form anyway, we don't count the dragon form. And this is leading us quite nicely into our upcoming Elbaf saga, the Island of Giants, where if Luffy does have a new opponent, you'd best believe that he'll be likely 5 or even 6 Luffys tall. But let's get to the crazy stuff. Here is the size of the One Piece planet. Going back to this bird's eye shot of Alabasta, knowing that the length of the nation is 3,180 kilometers, we can then extrapolate that the total length in this image is somewhere around the region of 73,000 kilometers, which is almost twice the circumference of the planet Earth. So you could fit every country on Earth and all of its water surface in this panel twice over. And what we're going to do from here is we're going to be as conservative as we possibly can. And we're going to say that the upper and lower barriers of this panel represent the full height of the Grand Line. And if you went any higher or any lower, you'd end up up in the Calm Belt. That's what we're going with, but this is where things get a tiny bit tricky, because unfortunately for us, there is no official map of the One Piece world. In fact, that's kind of Nami's whole dream, to be the first person to properly map the world. And unfortunately, what that means is that every time a new map has been shown to us in the anime and the manga, the scale is pretty wildly out of proportion with every other time it's appeared. However, there is a map drawn by the author Eiichiro Oda which was never intended for release. However, it did eventually see the light of day, and this served as his own personal guide for the world, which was later digitized and released as part of Rurubu One Piece, which is a travel guide for the One Piece world, and so it includes the updated version of Oda's original map. Updated because a lot of stuff changed, like island placement and names, etc., but not the overall construction. And so for this next section, I have to give full credit to Diabolus414 on the One Piece power scaling Reddit, who spent God knows how long breaking this map down according to the canon measurements that we've already gone over, and it has resulted in the following not so surprising revelations. The distance of Skypiea clocks in at 4,176 kilometers, the Empire of Totaland is 4,350, and even Drum Island comes ridiculously close to the Oda standard, being 3,828 kilometers. So that's 3 more Australias to add to the tally. And again, this doesn't surprise me. At this point, I'm convinced that when designing a new island, Oda uses a standard 1,000 retemplate. But our absolute mad lad Redditor even went through and calculated the size of the average Grand Line Island, because most of them, as stated before, are much smaller than our main stops, and that average was 2,349 kilometers from coast to coast. So if we were going to take Marco's words seriously, and there's no reason why we shouldn't, then we have a world with somewhere between 10 to 20 million islands, the average size of which is somewhere around as big as Greenland. Meanwhile, the entire length of the Grand Line and the New World, including both intersections of the Red Line, which is the circumference of the One Piece planet, is just shy of 1 million kilometers, which is more than twice the circumference of Jupiter, the biggest of boys in our solar system, not including the sun, of course, which has a circumference of 4 times the One Piece planet. But look, it's still pretty damn wild that we are looking at a quarter of a sun here. So to conclude the inquiry of how big the One Piece world is, I think you'll all agree that the best answer is very,